Welcome to another episode of Getting Started in Commercial Real Estate. My name is Jason Luckhart. I'm the National Manager for NAI Harcourts in Australia. And in this particular episode, I'm going to take you through what does a commercial property manager do, looking to break that down into the different categories of commercial property managers that exist, give you an understanding of the different types, different relationships they have with the marketplace. And I'm also going to look into outgoings and try to explain how they work, how they're charged back, what the rights and responsibilities and obligations around outgoings are, and how that fits in the daily life of a commercial property manager. So one of the things that I come across pretty regularly as a part of a major franchise group is that we have a large residential property management portfolio, and I constantly am queried in relation to what is wrong with having commercial properties in the portfolio as well. I'm not going to suggest there's anything wrong with that. What I'm going to do is question whether or not that's the sort of business that you want to be in by taking you through the roles of a commercial property manager, and then you can decide whether or not it's right as a business activity and a function for you. Many of the elements of property management look pretty similar between residential and commercial. It's when you get a little bit deeper that you notice the significant differences. Commercial property managers, CPMs, they ensure properties are well maintained, look good, that they operate smoothly, and generally they're there to preserve the value of the asset. Pretty similar to residential in that regard. Much of it is done in the commercial world by handling the financial operations of the property. They ensure that rent and outgoings are collected. They ensure that the taxes, the rates, any fees, insurance premiums, and in some cases even the mortgages are paid on behalf of the owner. Where they get a little bit different to residential, though, is that in most cases, the commercial property managers are required to prepare the budgets and the financial reports, in particular the outgoings in relation to the commercial property. Another area of difference is that the application of annual rental increases, particularly consumer price index review, percentage reviews, and sometimes even at the end of leases and when options are being taken up, the review to market and the indexations that are required there. Quite a range of different mechanisms, but commercial property managers are usually adept at handling this. Not something that normally comes into the day-to-day life of a residential property manager. Financial statements, periodical reports to the owners, what the occupancy rates look like, a calendar of expiration of leases, all other matters in relation to how those leases sit. When vacancies occur, commercial property managers often are involved in the process of finding a new tenant, but sometimes that process involves, as much as anything else, picking the right sort of leasing agent to handle the actual campaign. So what we find is that there's an increased sophistication around the asset and as regard the services that are required to be delivered. For many owners, they'll often decide that they lack the time, the experience, the expertise, and the desire to handle all these elements of commercial management. The property manager on their behalf would often be meeting prospective lessees. They'll be showing them through the properties. They might be working hand in hand with a leasing manager or an agent, or they might undertake it themselves. They'll discuss the lease and explain the terms of the occupancy. They'll, as mentioned before, review the annual rental, the increases, and they'll apply them. They'll also be undertaking inspections of the building and its facilities, looking around the grounds, the equipment, making sure everything's up to code, to standard, that it's in good working order, and generally be involved in the workplace health and safety. They'll also arrange things such as any new equipment, any repairs that are required, and we would normally refer to this in the world of commercial as CapEx, short for capital expenditure. Commercial property managers will also arrange and oversee trash removal in the case where it's not just a council provided service, particularly in larger format premises. The maintenance, the landscaping, security, any other services that need to be provided to the building, the premises as a whole, the OPEX or operating expenses. They'll also investigate and settle complaints in a lot of cases, any disturbance or violations, particularly in relation to lease requirements and obligations, hours of operation, making sure that it's compliant with local laws in relation to zonings. So they become probably more of the beat cop in regards to looking after the property, where residential property managers usually have the option of handling major complaints and disturbances onto to third parties such as council or even local authorities. Commercial property managers keep all the records of rental activity, the tenant and owner, and any of their requests. They do this in a lot of cases for legal requirements. And they also ensure, as mentioned before, the compliance with any local laws. So, as I said at the beginning, look to sort of break this down a bit further and give you an understanding of the different types of commercial property managers that exist out there. One of the ones that most of us are familiar with, any of us have been to a local shopping centre, shopping mall, any of us have gone in to visit a solicitor in town to a large building, often find that there are on-site property managers with any of these large properties. They're generally responsible for day-to-day operation of it as a singular property, hence why they're on site. So as I said, an office building or a shopping centre. In doing so, they ensure that the property is well maintained, and they're regularly and routinely about the premises, the grounds, throughout the facility, looking at the equipment contained within and making judgment calls in regards to whether or not simply maintenance or repairs that are required, or indeed sometimes even full replacement. They'll generally meet with the current tenants, action requests for repairs, and deal with any of their issues or complaints. They'll also meet new tenants and then show them through the vacant premises and look to find out what their requirements under any new lease might be. In doing so, they're generally there to enforce the terms of the rental or the lease contract along the guidelines that are imposed, whether that be just simply from a centre perspective, whether it involves a body corporate or maybe a building association. They enforce these, right through, like from the rent collection, but things like parking, operating hours, when you can be on premises, what type of activities you're going to undertake on the premises, and ensure that it's all done correctly, right through to the vacating of the lease at the end of term and what the make good looks like. Often residential property managers are undertaking their periodic inspections, like 3 monthly, quarterly, to make sure that the premises aren't being unduly affected and bad wear and tear in that regard. Commercially, less of an issue because generally it's going to be followed up as part of the lease obligations for things such as make good or rectification requirements that will be strictly imposed upon a commercial tenant. Other important duties that they've got, though, really stem around the keeping the updated records of the building, particularly in regards to the income and expenditure, and reporting these usually at a fairly sort of senior level, so that timely budgets can be prepared from year to year. What other type of CPMs do we have out there, though, as well? Have a look at real estate asset managers or fund managers. Fairly detailed sort of role. We'll also look at portfolio managers. So in the case of fund managers, they're often involved right from the planning stage at the start, right through the purchase, sometimes the development of the property on behalf of usually third parties that they're closely related to, those, so businesses or investors or funds that they're directly answering to. They have a focus on the long-term situation in relation to the property rather than purely the day-to-day, and that's why they'll often work hand in hand with the former category, the on-site managers, or in the smaller case, they might push it out to a portfolio manager. They make decisions in relation to the acquisition of the property, and they'll consider the whole range of aspects in association with that property. such as what are its present values and likely future values, how that will affect it from a taxation position, whether or not the zoning is correct right now, or indeed if there's an actual opportunity hidden within inside that zoning for further improvements, enhancements to the property and its portfolio. What sort of other external factors are going on? So population growth within the area, transport and access to transport, what sort of traffic volumes right now, any other patterns that emerge, and obviously they'll then also look at how that affects the rental returns and what the longer term position, so the trading, security and viability of a tenant might look like. They'll also be involved as a result of all of this in terms of the long-term strategy about identifying whether or not the property is reaching the end of its usable life from a financially profitable perspective, or whether or not it may have actually maximised its opportunities, and it's an opportunity now for them as the fund managers to transact the property and remove it from their portfolio. So that brings us to portfolio managers, so something more traditional, more what we see in our franchise type model at the moment, looking after a wide range of assets, usually a mixture of ownership within that asset pool, and can be quite a wide ranging geographic and demographic in relation to what is inside the portfolio that's being looked after. This will obviously be handled from them via a central location, so an office, a franchise office, for example, and they'll conduct their regular inspections of the properties as part of normal conduct of business, along with rental collections, general maintenance, but they are still also required to look at the preparation of outgoings budgets, deal with all the other operational aspects. So they'll follow through on currency of insurance from tenants, they'll look after the lease renewals, they'll also look at all of those indexations, as I mentioned before. So understanding the different roles there then takes us on to the imposition of outgoings and understanding what outgoings, the role that they play in commercial investment. So outgoings are the landlord's reasonable expenses associated with the premises that they are then looking to pass on to the tenant if properly documented with inside the lease. So I'm going to look at some of the common outgoings that we would see. By no means take this as an exhaustive list. Obviously, this is the role for the property manager to find out what are all the expenses. But looking at things such as the taxes, any sorts of council rates, body corporate levies, any audit fees in relation to how this expenditure is being undertaken. Indeed, also management fees will often sit within inside this as well. Also look at other operational costs that the landlord might pay, such as the cleaning and gardening around the premises, garbage collection, what sort of security services are required, fire protection equipment, making sure that it's up to date and it's regularly serviced. Any maintenance and repairs that are needed in there as well. But not going to pass on fair wear and tear when it gets to the replacement of things such as aircon. That itself will fall generally on the owner from a replacement point of view, but not replacement of things such as worn locks. Air conditioning servicing itself would be passed on directly to a tenant, but not the full replacement. In the case of large shopping centres, retail, marketing and advertising services can often be levied through the outgoings fund, and also general insurance, so common area insurance, public liability in relation to that, and building insurance, and then all the common expenses, common area expenses such as electricity, walkways, toilets, the sanitation in there, might be the electricity for the car park, might be for the servicing of the boom gate, the lifts, all of these types of commonly shared aspects of the property. So it leads us to what outgoings are recoverable and how you actually go about recovering them. In the first instance, I'd suggest that it's important to look at what sort of lease acts you have in relation to your local authority, whether it be a state or a local requirement. So at all times, check your local legislation. But typically, the lease act will define things as, you know, what's required to be popped into a disclosure statement, and how the disclosure statement is to be delivered to a tenant. Whether or not there's actually definitions of what recoverable outgoings make up within that local jurisdiction. And there might also be definitions in regards to how those outgoings are calculated and apportioned. Much of this, though, should be covered off in a lease, and the lease in the first instance should require that a tenant pay the outgoings and have provisions dictating that. It should give wide-ranging definitions in relation to how the estimates of the future outgoings are determined and when they're delivered to the tenant, how they're going to be accounted to the tenant at the end of the intervals, and then what sort of adjustments might occur in relation to it. So typically how it would work: budget's prepared, outgoings are levied on the basis undertaken in the lease. There's an audit at the end of the year and a reconciliation. If there's a shortfall, then further charges may be levied to the tenant, but that's been well defined. If there is an overpayment by the tenant, then there is typically a rebate or repayment to the tenant of any over expenditure in that regard from them. Where multiple tenancies and apportioning occurs, so more than one lease on a property, typically it's on the basis of lettable area, so a pro rata basis on that. Although not always, it can often be that some are heavier users of particular services under that, and so there'd be, again, definitions in relation to that. But be aware of the fact that it does need to be a definition of how you're going to apportion it. So the lease itself should establish how they're calculated and how they're apportioned. Then the important thing to remember at the end of the day with all of this is, as per the topic here, what is the role of a commercial property manager? They do all of this. They determine the budgets, the formulas for the division and the invoicing, the recouping of these costs, collection of rents. They're all key functions of a commercial property manager. And so whether or not small integration of a few commercial property managements into a larger residential portfolio can be handled quite easily, possibly in a regional area. As it becomes more urbanised, more sophisticated, I hope this highlights some of the difficulties that can come from taking on these types of roles. As always, I'm open to questions or follow-ups in relation to the information presented here. But look, in the meantime, check us out. Find some of the other items that are contained within our library in relation to getting started in commercial real estate. And I look forward to speaking to you further in the next episode, which I'm going to have a look at tips for building and maintaining a commercial rent roll. Thanks for joining me, and we'll talk again soon.